Hello and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. We're bringing you a special edition of our program. We've taken the show on the road. Last week, KQED experienced a computer outage because of a hacking attack, so we're not able to come to you from our regular studio. Later, we'll take you to the Electronic Frontier Foundation to discuss cybersecurity. But first, we begin here at UC Hastings College of the Law to talk about the week's big political and legal news. Yesterday, Senate Republicans released their long-awaited health care reform bill. And earlier in the week, the U.S. Supreme Court decided to hear a case on political redistricting. Plus, a closely watched congressional race in Georgia has sent ripples throughout the country, highlighting the role of California and exposing deepening divisions within the Democratic Party. And joining us now are UC Hastings Law Professor Rory Little, also James Taylor, University of San Francisco political scientist, and our very own KQED Politics and Government reporter Marisa Lagos. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Marisa, let's begin with you. Senate GOP leaders finally unveiled their health care bill yesterday. What are some of the key provisions?
Well, I think the biggest sort of takeaway is it's not as different from the House bill as a lot of folks expected. We're still seeing these massive repeals of the tax hikes that really funded Obamacare on the rich. We're seeing deep cuts to Medicaid. In California, that's the Medi-Cal program. The House version would have done that a little faster, so the Senate version is a slower rollout. But it would still slash payments and put a cap on that, really kind of making it not an entitlement program anymore. And it would allow states to drop what is considered essential benefits under Obamacare, like maternity care, mental health care, emergency services. It does keep more subsidies for the exchange than the House bill, but I think, you know, on balance, this is a very draconian change. It would be for a lot of Americans.
So how does this affect California? Because California had the most to gain under the Affordable Care Act. Does it now have the most to lose? Well,
I think it does. I mean, we have seen a massive expansion of our Medicaid program in California. We have seen a really aggressive push to get people on the health care exchange. And the advocates in California who really, pushed these expansions, and Governor Jerry Brown immediately came out really slamming this bill as being draconian and as potentially hurting California even more than some of the states that, especially red states that really didn't embrace this expansion of healthcare.
And James, this plan was hashed out behind closed doors. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell now wants to bring it up for a vote as early as next week. That gives lawmakers actually very little time to study it before voting on something this major.
No, this is about politics and process, and the way in which this is being sort of rushed through echoes a lot of what the Republicans, especially John Boehner, when he said, hell no, you can't, when he talked about and sort of enumerated the ways in which he felt that the Democrats had done this to the Republicans with the Affordable Health Care Act in the past. And so to see the Republicans sort of flip the script and now sort of meeting in secret for days, and then we're talking about 400 pages to be read in a short period of time, and then to vote, and then, the political process that follows that is, it's really a problem.
And I think we should say that while that was a GOP critique of Obamacare, I don't think it's fair to say that these are in any way similar processes, right? There was over 100 hearings on that bill.
Yeah.
GOP Republican senators and House members themselves made over 50 amendments to the bill. So this is a very different situation.
And California lawmakers have taken a very tough stance on fighting scaling back core provisions of the ACA. But realistically, James, how much power do they have to prevent an overhaul?
Well, I think a lot. I think a lot, because the old tradition of both parties has been localism, especially the Democrats. That's how they've governed for 50 years in the South, even longer, is sort of localism. And I thought when Trump came into power, this would be a new feature of American politics, is that the liberals will be arguing states' rights as ways of protecting themselves against federal initiatives in this way.
So the bottom line then, do you think that there are enough votes in the Senate for this thing to pass next week?
Well, with the vice president, yes, right now. But again, there are about 3 Republicans who are talking about coming out very soon to sort of express concerns that they have with the current state of the policy, and they're not willing to vote for it. And that is a problem for Mitch McConnell and for Paul Ryan ultimately. So this is a problem for them. It's not a done deal, and I think a defeat, as much as the Republicans are really excited about these local victories, a defeat again in health care would be a major setback, as we thought it was recently.
Well, they could pass it even if 2 Republicans said no, but 3, that becomes a problem.
I mean, it's interesting, though. It's like they have political sort of pitfalls if they pass it, and people feel like it is too draconian, and if they don't, they can't deliver on a promise they made, which really swept them to victory in 2016.
All right. And Rory, we are going to bring you into the discussion at this point because we want to turn to another big story this week, which is the U.S. Supreme Court has agreed to take up this fall Wisconsin gerrymandering case that could have huge implications for future elections. Can you take us through the key points of this case?
Yeah, this is a really blockbuster case. The arguments won't happen until next October. But, you know, legislatures around the country have tried to embed their party by drawing districts that basically block the other side from electing state representatives, even though they may have a majority. And this has been avoided by the Supreme Court for the last 2 or 3 decades. This case in Wisconsin, some brilliant social scientists have come up with a mathematical formula to test what's partisan gerrymandering. And if the court accepts that idea, then I think they would have to strike down the idea that you can block one person, one vote by defining your districts in a sort of unfair way. So the real issue here is, will they review it or not? And that's going to be the argument. If they decide to review it, that's big news, because then you're going to not be able to do this. If they decide not to review it, that's also big news, because it will basically eliminate the constitutional meaning of one person, one vote. So this is a very big case.
We've seen in the past a lot of challenges on the basis of racial inequality and sort of other things beyond this partisan question. But politically, this is a really interesting moment. Republicans were brilliant in 2010. They overtook state houses and governorships and really managed to draw the maps for 10 years in a way that enabled them to take back Congress and the Senate last year. And when you look at this case combined with the 2013 decision on the Voting Rights Act and the fact that they really took a lot of power away from the federal government there in reviewing states' sort of election laws, including redistricting ahead of time, this could kind of potentially, if they ruled in favor of Democrats, really in this case, turn the tide. But what I do think is interesting is Democrats did this just as much as Republicans. And in California, we don't have this problem anymore because we do have an independent redistricting commission. Both sides fought that tooth and nail, even though Republicans were in the minority, because there was always a lot of backroom deals in those cases where at least they would draw in some safe districts for the other side. And so I think both parties are as guilty as the other of this and have really fought any reforms.
Yeah. And just real quickly, you know, the name of gerrymandering comes from in our American politics, so back 205 years ago, from Elbridge Gerry, the Massachusetts governor who withdrew these districts that were so
salamander districts.
Yes, exactly.
They look like salamanders,
and they connected to his name. We know this history. But this has been a practice, and the Democrats have been masters at it before, the new technology. The Republicans have simply learned the new technology, the logarithms, the modeling, the game theory, and they figured it out better than Democrats right now. And so now they have an advantage that the Democrats have had. We saw this play out in Texas at when the state legislature redrew the map to give the Republicans the advantage that they hadn't had in 20 years that the Democrats had dominated. So this is an ongoing feature of American politics and the American political system.
So both the Democrats and Republicans have been, if you will, gaming the system. And if you break it down further, what is at the core here is that who gets to decide on major issues, right? Do you want the politicians picking the voters through gerrymandering, or do you want the voters to actually have a voice and actually have their decisions mean something, as opposed to politicians who are in such safe districts that they never have to be accountable?
And when you say who gets to decide, this is a case where Justice Gorsuch makes a huge difference. The court was unable to even grant review because they were tied 4-4 until Gorsuch came on. So this is one where President Trump's election, the loss of Merrick Garland as a justice as opposed to Gorsuch is going to make a huge difference. But if they vote along political lines in this case, so the Republicans in a sense say we're not going to review this, you never know when the pendulum could swing back. And so you're absolutely right that this is a case where they've got to be careful as to which way they rule, because the future is a long road. Yeah.
And I'll just note that without this case, if they do sort of grant review and say that this is unfair, it could have bigger implications because only about half the states have direct democracy where you can put ballot initiatives on the ballot. And that's one of the big things when I talk to experts about this, that they say why California's model of an independent commission couldn't actually catch fire across the U.S. unless it was basically forced by the courts.
Mm-hmm.
So this could very much be a landmark case. All right, we will be watching that. Also want to turn your attention to something that has been very much in the headlines this week, a Georgia race, but with implications here in California as well. That congressional race was won this week by Republican Karen Handel. It's sending a lot of reverberations throughout our state. It was thought to be perhaps a bellwether race, that a Democrat could take over, and that could indeed signal some really good momentum for 2018 for the Democrats. But that didn't happen. So what does this mean for California and for the Democratic Party?
I mean, I think that there's a little danger. Democrats maybe went out a little too hard on this. I mean, this is a seat the GOP has held for 40 years in Georgia.
By 20%.
By 20%. Yeah. And so, you know, this is clearly a win for the Republicans and for Trump, but I would say that I don't think we can look at the tea leaves and say automatically in 2018 this means, you know, Republicans will keep the House. Yeah. What was interesting about this race, and you kind of touched on it, was how much California played a part, both in donations. I mean, the Democratic candidate raised, this was the most expensive House race in history. I think something like 9 times as much money came from California as from Georgia.
John Ossoff being the Democratic
candidate.
To the
Democrats. And in almost all the ads that the Republicans ran, they targeted not just, you know, the Democrats, but Nancy Pelosi specifically. And they really tied Ossoff to her, even though he was far more moderate. And so I think that it speaks to some bigger divisions in the party that we could get to, but also it's a little hard. I mean, all of the special elections we've had this year, the GOP has won, but these are, again, in seats where they carried them by double digits last year and are losing by only a few percentage points.
And it's always smart to sort of understand that there's something going on locally in all of these elections that we may not see that may have a more direct impact on the outcome than what we see as national issues or national politics.
So, you know, but President Trump's ratings are low, right? There's backlash against the health care bill, which we discussed earlier. Amid that backdrop, though, the Democrats still lost 4 special elections, not only in Georgia, but also in Kansas, Montana, and South Carolina. Why is that? Why couldn't they get the job done?
Well, I have this joke that I say that the Democrats are like the New Jersey Generals, and nobody knows who the New Jersey Generals are until you mention it. They're the team that always automatically loses to the Harlem Globetrotters, and they get paid to lose to them. And that's what the Democrats seem to be, you know, doing. I mean, this goes back to, you know, Roy Rogers' comments a long time ago about not belonging to an organized party, you know, being a Democrat. And I think Will Rogers, and I think that's a real issue in our situation. The Democrats lost to Donald Trump. Let's just think about that historically. And they haven't done anything to learn. They haven't learned from it, and they haven't had a real moment of reflection where they've had something that they could say, hey, America, we got your message. So they haven't had a victory since Donald Trump. And they're as equally unpopular, and Nancy Pelosi is equally as unpopular as Donald Trump is in some places.
Okay, so then what do they need to do at this point to show that they connect with the fears and anxieties of everyday Americans?
Tap into what Bernie Sanders tapped into, the true reputation and legacy of the Democratic Party going back to FDR. Going back to the liberal democratic legacy of FDR, I think is the only way forward for the Democrats, because the demographics of this country will meet them there if they move in that direction with the browning of this country. But what we see through the current situation, the Democrats don't have a strategy. They don't know what to do in terms of dealing with these cultural issues that most people don't want to talk about, but it's culture that has driven this Trump moment. It's culture that has driven the politics we're dealing with. It's culture that plays around, you know, healthcare policy, et cetera. And so for the Democrats to not get that is, I think, a real issue that they're missing on, because they want to just continue on as usual, take their constituent groups for granted and think that's going to be enough. But they have to do politics.
Rory, did you want to add something?
Well, they've got a great candidate now running against Paul Ryan, the Democrats. I mean, these 4 districts were Republican districts. There was no doubt, really, that the Republicans had a majority. But they've got a guy running against Paul Ryan right now, a Democrat, who's wearing a hard hat, he's an iron worker, and that's all he does. And that's what the Democrats have to do, is connect with the working class and the people who really feel besieged, the same people that Donald Trump spoke to. They ought to be Democrats.
All right, before we wrap up this segment, I want to turn our attention to something else that a lot of people are watching, Rory, and that is the Supreme Court is considering an appeal by the Trump administration to allow an order restricting travel to the U.S. from 6 Muslim-majority countries. Now, when do you think we can expect to hear the Supreme Court announce whether it will take that case or not?
Well, there are 2 things pending. One is whether to stay the lower court decisions that have already put the ban on hold, should that be removed in a sense, and the other is to review the case. Both of those orders, I think, will come on Monday. And they could go in different directions. That is, they could deny the motion for stay, but grant review and then hold argument in the fall, or hold argument even over the summer. The Solicitor General has asked for an expedited argument schedule. I think you'll see orders on Monday, and of course here's another one where Justice Gorsuch is going to make the difference. He's the fifth vote on this, most people think. Although, you know, the president has offended the federal judiciary by criticizing them along the way. And it wasn't just the Ninth Circuit that ruled against the travel ban. It was also the Fourth Circuit, which is based in Virginia, which is not a liberal bastion.
And he also hurt himself with all those tweets he keeps on putting out, right?
So it's not clear where the Chief Justice, he doesn't want his district court judges attacked. So it's really very hard to predict on the merits where this thing goes.
I mean, and there's two cases at play here. The Virginia case, which really had a sort of more sweeping ruling that said this was discriminatory, and the Hawaii case, which California has joined as a friend of the court on behalf of our Attorney General. And they're basically saying that the president sort of stepped out of bounds with his authority granted him by Congress. So the Supreme Court has some options here. And you know, what could come down may not be as sweeping as either side wants.
And it's possible that they'll just deny review. It's possible they'll say, you know what, it doesn't matter because we seem to be doing fine. They're now vetting the procedures, and so let's just deny review and see what happens. It was supposed to be temporary anyway, right? I mean, and that's sort of the irony here.
Well, if they deny review, what does that mean? The lower court rulings stand, and for all intents and purposes, the travel ban will not be enforced? Well,
this travel ban, you know, the president could issue another travel ban tomorrow. I mean, the president has the authority by executive order to do lots of things with immigration. So this has become more of a political fight than it is really a legal fight.
Yeah.
We will leave it there, and we will look on Monday to see if it comes down as you have predicted, Rory. Pressure's on.
Pressure's on. I'm always
He'll
wrong.
be emailing us. I told you I was right.
That's right. He'll be tweeting that out.
Exactly.
Thank you all. UC Hastings Law Professor Rory Little, Marisa Lagos, KQED's political and government reporter, and also University of San Francisco political scientist James Taylor. Pleasure to have all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
This week, automaker Honda temporarily halted production at its Japan facility after discovering attempts to hack its computer systems. This comes on the heels of a massive attack in May where companies in more than 150 countries were targeted, and it affected hundreds of thousands of computers worldwide. Last week, KQED had its own temporary outage when we noticed suspicious activity on our computers. All of these incidents have something in common. They're called ransomware attacks, and they prompted us to dig deeper. I'm here at the office of the Electronic Frontier Foundation in San Francisco to talk with staff technologist Cooper Quintin about how ransomware works. All right, Cooper, what is ransomware?
So ransomware is a type of malicious computer software or malware that encrypts all your files so that you can no longer have access to them and you can no longer view them. And then it charges you to decrypt them. And it usually asks for payment in Bitcoin, which is a type of digital currency.
And on a computer screen, if you're attacked, what does that look like?
So I have a demonstration right here. So here's my computer screen, and I have all my important files. Here's my picture of my cat Nushi. Here's some other pictures of my family, tax forms, etc. And I have this file here, which is a file that was maybe sent to me by somebody that I know, or it was on a USB drive, or maybe I downloaded it from the internet, right? Okay. And it says silly fun time and tacos, so I'm gonna go ahead and run it because tacos sound great. When I run it though, I get, oops, all of your important files have been encrypted. And suddenly, none of my files are accessible anymore. So if I try to open my cat picture, it's no longer there. If I try to open my taxes, they're no longer there. All of my files now are completely inaccessible. And in a minute, this window is going to pop up telling me what to do and how I can regain access to my files.
By paying a ransom.
By paying a ransom, exactly.
Oh, there it goes.
So there's the window. So now it says, what happened to my computer? Your important files have been encrypted, and there's a countdown here. I have 3 days left to pay the ransom.
And what happens if you don't pay the ransom?
If I don't pay the ransom, all my files will be encrypted forever, and I won't be able to recover them. So I won't be able to view them, I won't be able to read them or anything.
So if this happens, what should you do?
Hopefully, you have backups. If you have backups, you can wipe your computer and completely reset it and restore all your files from backups. If you don't have backups, the situation becomes more difficult. You have to decide whether or not the files are important enough to pay the ransom. And if you pay the ransom, you still might not get your files back. So you have to decide if it's worth potentially losing that money to recover your files.
All hard decisions.
All hard decisions.
And we're being joined now by Elizabeth Weise, tech reporter at USA Today, and Cooper Quintin with the Electronic Frontier Foundation will stay here with us as well to talk about the broader implications of all this. Elizabeth, let's begin with you. How big is the ransomware problem?
It's global, and the FBI had numbers a couple of years ago that we were talking hundreds of millions of dollars being sucked out of businesses and individuals across the world every year by large criminal enterprises who this is how they make their money.
Some of these enterprises are thought to make between $30 and $60 million a year on ransomware.
And it's like a business, right? They actually have consumer hotlines that you call if you want to pay up the ransom.
Right, it's not some teenager sitting in his garage. These are effectively organized crime. They have offices, they have office workers who come in, they have help desks available in multiple languages. They are organized to extract money from you by putting ransomware on your computer.
Cooper, is there a common thread to who is targeted in these types of ransomware attacks?
Really anybody can be targeted by these ransomware attacks. It's a very opportunistic thing, right? You want to make money wherever you can. And so you send the ransomware out to everyone and hope that some people will click on it.
And what about healthcare? Does that seem to be sort of a new niche now? Because in the case of WannaCry, for example, 16 national health organizations in England were hit.
The biggest thing in England was that the National Health Service was running some computers that ran Microsoft XP, which is this very old and no longer supported version of Microsoft Windows, and those were vulnerable to WannaCry. And healthcare systems often have those kinds of old programs because they are wary of updating them because they don't know if it'll knock out the rest of their system.
The more recent attacks reportedly stem from secret spy tools allegedly used by our own government's National Security Agency. And I know, Elizabeth, you've reported on this, and it was a hacking group called Shadow Brokers that published 15 exploits used by the NSA?
They published 15 exploits that had been allegedly written by the NSA and then release them online to anybody. And the problem with that is it's kind of like putting out the blueprints to something, and then anybody can take them and try and build something. They can either try and weaponize it or they can try and monetize it. In the case of WannaCry, they tried to monetize it by turning it into ransomware. And Shadow Brokers has said that they have a lot more coming from the NSA. In fact, they've said they're going to do a dump sometime in July, so there could be more coming.
And so the concern is that there will be further ransomware attacks or other types of malware attacks from that.
So then, Cooper, how do you stop ransomware attacks if there are copycats out there and variants constantly being put out there?
Like we said, it's a business. And the way you stop a business is by making their business model unsustainable. So if people stop paying the ransoms, then ransomware no longer becomes profitable.
And Elizabeth, how hard is it to try to track down those responsible for ransomware?
It's almost impossible. I mean, attribution is very difficult. They're very good at having the messages go from server to server to server, so you don't know where they're coming from, you don't know where they're based. I mean, the belief is that a lot of these criminal groups are based in Eastern Europe. It's very difficult to say for certain where they are, though. We do know that their help desks tend to work on certain time zones that are in Eastern Europe. We know that they take certain holidays sometimes off that are only celebrated there, but really, and it's across national boundaries. So you can't, file a lawsuit against a criminal enterprise that is working out of Belarus because you're never going to get anywhere.
And with ransomware, what we're seeing is that the perpetrators want to be paid in Bitcoin, not necessarily with dollars. What is Bitcoin, and why is that the preferred currency?
So Bitcoin is an untraceable electronic currency. They call them cryptocurrencies.
And also, the way it works is you have what's called a wallet in the Bitcoin terminology. And you can think of it like an envelope with a long random number written across it. And I can take one Bitcoin from my envelope with my long random number and place it in another envelope with another long number written across it. And there's a public ledger of every transaction that happens. So it'll say envelope 1234, which belongs to me, gave 1 Bitcoin to envelope 4321. The hard part is knowing which real person owns which envelope. So there's no way to know that you own envelope 4321 unless you publicly say so.
And so these cryptocurrencies are the preferred payment system because they can't be traced by anyone.
How much is 1 Bitcoin worth?
Right now, a Bitcoin is worth about $2,600.
We have an increasingly networked world now, right, where so many things are internet reliant in your work, at your home. It makes things more convenient, yes, but it also opens up a lot of vulnerabilities. Is this a wake-up call to all the risks associated with that?
Certainly. As we connect more things to the internet, we invite more potential vulnerabilities into our homes and into our private lives. So I think this should definitely be treated as a wake-up call. If you have a heater or an air conditioner that's hooked up to the internet and the air conditioner gets affected with ransomware, suddenly your house is 100 degrees because your air conditioner is useless until you pay the ransomer. So yeah, this is definitely something we should be thinking about as we connect more things to the internet, as we connect our lives more to the internet.
So Cooper, how can people protect themselves from ransomware?
People can protect themselves from ransomware by practicing basic digital security hygiene. The most important thing is to back up your important files and back up all your files. You can back them up to an external hard drive or you can back them up to the cloud, but back them up somewhere.
What about thumb drives? Because, you know, we get these freebie thumb drives at conferences, conventions all the time. Are they safe?
Thumb drives are kryptonite. You really have to think of them as kryptonite. You don't know what's on them. You don't know who touched it before you did. And I always tell people, you know, go buy your own. Don't just take the ones people give you. And then make sure that you run it through some sort of security program first to make sure that it's clean. I mean, that's not a 100% guarantee, but it's a 99% guarantee. I think a lot of this, it's kind of like, you may never protect yourself against ever getting the common cold, but there are a lot of things you can do to really reduce the risk that you're going to get sick.
And then the other important thing is to make sure that all of your software is up to date. Make sure Windows is up to date, make sure your browser is up to date. When that pop-up comes up and says update your software, you should update your software. And then, of course, to not click on attachments or links that are sent to you, even if it's from somebody you know. You should call them and verify that they actually sent you this thing if you weren't expecting them to send it to you.
I talked to a woman who worked at a small hardware business in the Midwest about ransomware a couple of months ago, and she was almost in tears because she'd basically destroyed her family's business by clicking on something. And she said, and the one silver lining was I had all her family photos backed up to the Amazon cloud, and so at least I knew that all the pictures of my kids were safe. So, you know, use cloud. Cloud is safe, so that's where you can put things.
That is a good cautionary tale to end on. Elizabeth Weise with USA Today and also Cooper Quintin with the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Thanks to you both. And that does it for us. Thank you for joining us. From UC Hastings College of the Law, I'm Thuy Vu. For more of our coverage, go to kqed.org/newsroom.